Hi, this is Alina. I'm co-founder and co-CEO at Chili Pepper, and today I have Katie with me at Sprig. We're going to talk about how to create amazing content that converts. What about, specifically about content creation and storytelling, gets you so much energy to want to work on it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it's almost becoming people's hobby in addition to their jobs, and people are engaging with content to make themselves better employees. They're not just going to work and like reading content when they're buying a new tool. They're surrounding themselves with content because they identify with their role and they view it as something really core to themselves. And so I think when you realize that, and you realize that people are reading your stuff at like midnight when they're in bed, or they're like really engaging with it in like a more personal way, it makes it like very enjoyable to sort of feel like you're helping people along that journey too.
I've always knew deep down that this is a very effective medium because you get a chance to create things that are actionable and valuable, and the more intentional you are with it, you create valuable moments for your customers before they even think about you. And it was just not something that I was prioritizing as part of my all my other jobs. What do you think triggers someone to think, okay, this is something that I should be looking at? And how do you think founders should be approaching content creation?
I think a lot of founders feel the same way you do. Like they understand fundamentally that it's important. It's like we're all humans, right? We understand that like you look at this and you know that it's valuable, especially if it's aligned with your company mission and your point of view and like all of that. I think the expectations of like how we all have investors and just like the amount of time that we're expecting it to pay off, it can be hard to be patient when your growth goals are not patient, right? And so I think that's like the conflict and the tension I see. It's not that they don't want to do it. It's that they still have their dashboards, they still have their reports, and those goals are not, they're very aggressive. And so how do you sort of reconcile the two?
How do you think those that have not yet started the content creation arm, that's not yet mature yet, how do you think that you get started? How should they think about their first hire, about their systems in place?
That's a good question. I think it's really dependent on the company and like what their resources are. I think you mentioned this before we even started talking, is to like do the job before you hire for it. And so having one person come in, or even the founder doing a little bit when they get started, and then, they realize what they need, they hire the first person, probably an individual contributor, hopefully like a high impact, high potential individual contributor. They can start and do a lot of the work themselves and then replace themselves. I think that's the best way to do it and the most chances of success.
What have you seen as the most impactful content pieces in your journey so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the way that I look at content for a company is like first like a foundational layer. Mm-hmm. So you need to really have a story and a point of view for your company, or if you have multiple products within a company, you need to have a story for each of those. And so at Sprig, for example, we have sort of three core stories that we're telling. We have two products. So we have an in-product survey, and then we have a concept and usability testing platform. Same platform, but two products within the same platform that you could buy separately if you want. And then we have like a brand story around doing research across the product lifecycle that ties those two products together. So the way that we think about it is we're building three pillar sort of stories. One around in-product surveys, which is creating a new category because it really doesn't exist yet. And having a lot of people understand why they need to even do it to begin with. That's the goal of that one. Concept and usability testing is second. It's already an established category. People are already doing it. So there it's really about identifying our differentiators and building a story that speaks to that. And then the third is the lifecycle brand story. That's something that people are not really thinking about yet. And it really speaks to like our overarching POV and building based on that. And then next level down is really understanding what are the perceptions that we want people to think about the product one, the product two, and then our brand story. And starting to build a map of what do we want this content to communicate? what are the perceptions after reading this content do we want people to feel and associate with our brand? And a good check on that is like, if they feel that way after they read the content, they would immediately want to buy our product, right? So like, how can we map out what that looks like? And then we go into, okay, so what does that look like? What are the things that we're going to say? What are the core, maybe like the 4 or 5 core messages per piece that we're going to build that piece around? And then we just start creating the content in order to be efficient. And you probably are also thinking about this too, is like, how do we take that pillar content and then use it across all channels, right? How do we turn a guide into 10 blog posts? How do we take that 10 blog posts and put it into our social calendar for the year? How do we create multiple different content formats per each of those? So a lot of them, it's actually we're not creating that pillar first. Some of them we're creating, a webinar series first, and then that goes into the, a guide or that, so it can go multiple directions. It doesn't have to be like a linear process, and startups are messy. So for the most part, like, things are happening at different times, but they're coalescing around those sort of 3 core pillars.
I see. So it's about creating the story around why someone might even think about using the product, and understanding how to drive them emotionally to take action. How do you create emotion in content?
There's a few really good books on this topic. Influence is one of my favorite books by Robert Cialdini. I read it when I ended up going back to grad school and took a consumer behavior class. It's been one of like the foundational classes that I've ever taken by a professor that deeply influenced me on how I think about marketing and psychology. So understanding like what drives people, what they care about, and then the techniques that you can use to really like impact how they think.
What are some of those techniques?
One common one is just like, what are people afraid of? What are they scared of? And how can you play off of that? At Sprig, we sell to product leaders, we sell to researchers, and nobody wants to create a product that's going to flop, right? Like, that's ultimately, you spend hours, you spend years sometimes building these products, and at the end of the day, like, the last thing someone wants, they can get fired, right? Like, they can lose their job. Like, bring up some of those fears that they have, and show how you can really quell those fears, right? How can you make it easier for them?
I think it's very, very hard to capture joyous moments in content, because in general, clicks are generated by sad news and bad things happening in the world. And you see that in the press all the time. All the clicks are about this horrible thing has happened. You won't believe what this person did this to this other person. And it's very hard to capture attention with happy moments. Yeah. Why do you think our brain doesn't pay attention to happy that much?
Well, it's actually like, it's proven that like people, like, they are impacted by fear and negativity more than they're impacted by positivity. Like, we just are. We will run from fear faster than we will run to joy. I don't know what that says about us as like a human society, but so yeah, it's proven it like works better. But it's not to say that joy doesn't work. I think with whatever you do, you need to be on the extremes. It's funny. I also I publish a lot of my own content, and I don't even realize I'm doing it, but I embellish everything. Like, no one knows what's actually happening, right? And so I'm not saying to lie to your audience, but you need to embellish, because if you don't embellish and you don't make it seem bigger or better or more interesting or more dramatic, like, they're just not going to pay attention. And so you got to continue to like loop back in the drama, like every so often, right? And there's a way to make everything dramatic.
I'm also wondering if there is another tip that you can give to content writers that might make their content more actionable, like for people to subscribe to a newsletter or to check the CTA. What have you found some top things that people can apply right away?
I mean, I think it's really basic, but just like put yourself in the mind of the reader, right? And like make a goal. Like, I want them to take 3 things away from this article that they could go implement tomorrow. I spend a lot of time working with my team and working with other marketers to help them think about, like, what does it really mean to be actionable, right? What is it, like, what is the threshold that you need to be at? It doesn't need to be, an exact template, right? It could be a tip. It could be simply one thing. Just like you're looking for actionable tips, like as we're talking. But you need to have an understanding of value. So what is going to be something that your customer is going to value enough to remember and to use again in their life, right? They're going to read it and they're going to remember it, and then they're going to go tell someone else. So it can be something super small, just a learning, right? That they learned and they can apply to their job. Again, it doesn't have to be a template or a checklist or anything like that. It just has to be valuable enough. And so that's a lot of times I spend working with our subject matter experts and trying to figure out what's the gap between what our audience knows and what our subject matter knows. And my job as the marketer is to connect it and figure out what's new that most of our audience doesn't know.